Welcome back, everyone. And today we are joined again with Sebastian from the Kilowatt Station. How is your world, Sebastian?
Awesome. Can't complain.
Alrighty. So, as EV drivers, we always hear crazy stories and claims made about electric vehicles, whether this be in the news, social media, or just people we meet on the road and out in the town. Today, we're going to choose a few of these comments and questions, and we will let you know if it's fact or fiction. So, we're probably going to start a little series called Fact or Fiction. We'll just pick about 2 or 3 of these to address. Today, I believe I have 3 and Sebastian has 3. We'll address it, state fact or fiction, kind of give you the news source or data behind it. So, are you ready, Sebastian, to get started?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, we will start with you. What is your first one?
So my first one is the myth is EVs are not reliable and have high maintenance costs. So generally speaking, EVs require way less maintenance than a typical or comparable gas vehicle because there's fewer moving parts, right? When you think about all the stuff that goes into an actual combustion engine, you have your pistons and timing chains and a belt, and then you've got all the oiling, the stuff that oils it, water pumps, all the different components, required to make it tick. In an EV, it's relatively simple. You have your electric motor, your battery, and then some components to basically take power from the battery, make it into something the motor can, handle. Most EVs have a 1-speed transmission, right? If they want to go in reverse, they just run the motor backwards. It's not like there's no real, complex, there's nothing complex to it. And then adding on to that, you get away from like kind of the motors, like brakes, for example. EVs do regenerative braking for the most part, so you end up going way further on your brake pads and your brake rotors, stuff like that. So generally speaking, your regular maintenance items are basically washer fluid and then just double checking, some fluid levels maybe every now and again. And as the technology matures, we're seeing less and less issues out of the actual EV specific components.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. EVs are a more simpler vehicle. They're not as complex. You don't have the complexity of the engine and all the gears and all the motors and all the pistons and all that. They are very simple, but when they do break, it can get a little pricey. All right, so my first one is about safety, and what we hear is EVs are not as safe as traditional vehicles. I would have to say this is fiction. EVs are subject, people don't know, to the same rigorous safety standards as gasoline cars. They have to go through the same testing, same procedures. Many EVs have received high safety ratings from organizations like the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, also known as NHTSA, and the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, the IIHS. And you can go online and just Google safety ratings for any of these EVs. Most of them are going to get top scores, 5 stars. Additionally, the design of EVs also offers for a better crumple zone due to the absence of a traditional engine. So with the problem you have with the traditional cars, when you get a head-on collision, that engine crumples into the driver, which can cause the driver to get jammed up in there. You don't have that issue with EVs because there is most of the front of EVs is open. I mean, there's no engine up there to make that impact move back into the driver. Also, due to the heaviness of electric vehicles, there's less chance of rollover from side impacts. You have to worry about getting hit from the side and tipping over because these vehicles do weigh, 4, 5, 6,000 pounds. We also hear a lot of claims, and I get a lot of questions about EV fires. Government data shows gasoline vehicles are up to 100 times more prone to fires than EVs. There was a study back in 2020. I know that was some time ago, but it's still relevant today, which compared data from the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, and the Bureau of Transportation Statistics, BTS, and the government recall data from recalls.gov and put together kind of like a report. And it stated that gasoline cars average 1,500 fires per 100,000 car sales. EVs only average 25 car fires per 100,000 car sales. But what's interesting, and you can elaborate on this, Sebastian, you may have some information on this, is hybrids are more than gasoline and EV cars. I mean, there's an extreme, significantly higher number of hybrids that catch fire. And I don't know if that's just the perfect storm, the combination of gas and batteries, but that's something that probably needs to be looked at more closely.
So really for that, I would probably attribute to, and I haven't actually seen this study, but I would attribute, kind of since we're talking averages here, 1,500 per 100,000, there's a lot of gas cars on the road, right? But if you break it down to just hybrids, there's a lot less hybrids on the road. But they still have the gas car component to them. So if they are going to catch fire, then you end up having kind of that higher percentage for that one category. So it might not be that they necessarily catch fire more often. It might just be that it's a smaller sample size, but then they also still have, if you could just lump them in with the gas cars, because if that's, what's catching on fire, or if it's the EV components and lumping in with the EVs. But when you kind of narrow that sample size down so far, it ends up looking a lot worse than it is.
Totally agree. All right, what do you got next?
Yeah, so a common myth I kind of hear is, EVs can't handle bad weather or rough roads. And so just to start, it's a car. You can look at it, as a fancy spaceship, whatever. But at the end of the day, it's a car. Manufacturers design cars to be driven. They design cars for the world. They know the world. We know what the world consists of. It's going to rain. It's going to hail. There's going to be gravel roads, dirt roads, whatever. EVs, a lot of them are all-wheel drive. They have a dual motor setup, one motor on the front, one motor on the rear. And so that helps, kind of with rough terrain and driving on, maybe slippery roads or whatnot. But additionally, EVs are super heavy, kind of, or not super heavy. It depends on which EV you get.
Yep.
But, generally speaking, they do way more than the comparable gas car. And because of that, that helps with traction on snow or ice. Just, you have more mass to kind of keep you planted on the ground. And then at the same time, typically all your EV components are at the very bottom of the car. So you have that lower center of gravity, which, can also help with stability and handling. But just ultimately, it's a car. The manufacturers build it to be a car. They don't want it to break as bad as you don't want it to break. So it's going to be able to handle a pothole here, rough roads, dirt roads, gravel, whatever you might throw at it. So.
Yeah, totally agree with you. I think what some people may be mistaken as not being a great build quality is maybe just a tighter suspension because of the way the vehicles and how the vehicles travel, which a lot of the vehicles, especially the Model Ys, do have that tighter suspension. It's not a smooth ride, but it doesn't mean it's going to break down even more. So,
right.
All right, next up, we hear this all the time. There are not enough charging stations for electric vehicle. I would consider this to be true. It's a fact. The number of charging stations are rapidly increasing. We have public and private investments. We have the whole new Infrastructure Act through the federal government that was signed by the Biden administration that's supposed to ramp up EV DC fast chargers throughout the country. It's kind of slow. I mean, it's kind of been slow progress here in Arkansas. I think we're about 3 years into it, and we finally got locations, but I don't think we've actually broke ground on any of them yet. Many EV owners also charge their vehicles at home. You charge yours at home. I charge mine at home. So the only time we really need these charging stations is traveling. We all know charging infrastructure is improving, but it's still kind of lacking, especially in rural areas and in areas in the center part of the United States. Where we live in the South, there's still not enough, DC fast charging stations and level 2 charging stations to make traveling in an EV a lot more easy. I mean, just look around my own state. We know there's not enough DC fast charging here. I think we have like 9 or 10 Teslas, 2 or 3 other ones. And that's just something that's going to take time because, initially you had demand outweigh, these charging stations. You had a high demand, and building a charging station is sometimes not as easy as building a gas station. A gas station just grabs some land, throw some electricity, throw the bins in there to hold the gas, the tubs, and you're good to go. You're with EVs, charging stations, you're dealing with, municipalities, you're dealing with permitting, you're dealing with putting it out of business owner, you're dealing with the local energy company, you're dealing with the energy grid. So it makes it a lot more complicated to put up these EV charging stations.
Yep, for sure. And that's something, it is though rapidly improving. It's like you mentioned, the whole NEVI funding thing, which that could be a whole different episode talking about the kind of mess that seems to have been, but there has been some good come out of it so far, and I hope we continue to see good come out of it. But that should help, alleviate a lot of these kind of gaps where maybe there needs to be more infrastructure if they can ever get the dang sites in the ground. But, like you said, for most day-to-day driving, you're charging at home anyway. So it doesn't really matter how much infrastructure there is out there.
Yep. Doesn't matter. Yep. True. That is so true. All right. What's your last one?
So this kind of ties into that, but the myth is that you need special home charging equipment, like a special setup to charge your EV at home. And that can be true, but it's not as special as a lot of people might think it is. Generally speaking, most people want that level 2 charger at home, but they don't realize that the level 2 charger is using essentially the same type of electricity that your dryer uses or your oven. You already have that at your house. There's not, you might have to have an electrician install the outlet, but it's not
Mhm.
going to be anything super amazing, assuming you have, capacity in your panel. If you're not in a super old home or anything, that shouldn't be a big issue. And depending on how much you drive, a lot of EV owners can charge just on level 1, which is just plugging into a normal 3-prong household outlet. We just had a podcast episode, if you go back and look, talking about all the different levels of charging, and we really kind of dig down into, each specific one and how it benefits EV drivers, how it affects EV drivers. So go back and watch that if you haven't already.
Yes, home EV charging is not as complicated as people make it out to be. And I will echo your words too. Go check our last episode. We do a real deep dive into the different levels of EV charging. We kind of get kind of techie and nerdy in there, and it's kind of a cool episode. So if that interests you, just check out the last episode. All right, my last one is that EV batteries have a short lifespan. So everyone says, oh, you only be able to drive it for 1 or 2 years, have to replace the battery. And they are expensive to replace. So I kind of gave this a half and half. I said, yeah, part of that is true and part of that is not true. So we have a little bit of fact, a little bit of fiction. But modern EV batteries, ones that are more recent, are designed to last many years. Often warranties covering 8 years or more. A lot of companies offer 8-year, 100,000-mile warranties, 8-year, 125,000 warranties, 10-year, 125,000 warranties. So, and that's the longevity of what most people keep their vehicles. So if you're a person who keeps their vehicle for just 100, 125,000 miles, most likely it's going to be covered under one of these warranties from the manufacturers. Also, we've noticed in recent years that battery technology continues to improve, which enhances longevity and reduced costs. So even though just compared to 2 or 3 years ago, the price of lithium has come down, so it's reduced the price of the batteries, which is reducing the price of the cars. So, but battery replacement can be costly. It is generally a rare event, and the overall cost of ownership is often lower due to, as you kind of said before, reduced maintenance and fuel costs. You don't have the oil changes. You don't have, you have to go in there and get your system flushed and things like that. It's basically tires, brakes, and wipers, and that's about it. In the beginning, there were a limited number of models were available. When there were a limited number of models available, there was a several percentage of vehicles ended with battery failure. You have one of these. I'll have you elaborate on it here in a little bit. I believe, according to the data, the worst model year was 2011, which was, so think about it, a long time ago. So we're talking about 13, 14 years ago, where 7.5% failure rate, aside from recalls. So put away the recalls, 7.5% of the batteries in 2011 had to be replaced. In the next few years, it ranged from like 1.6% to 4.4%. So it has come down, but a lot of people were affected by those recalls. Starting in 2016 is kind of where we saw this change in battery replacements due to failures, excluding recalls. It's only been as high, I think, in 2016 as 0.5%. And for 2023, 0.01% of batteries will need to be replaced. So everyone out there thinking, if you own EV, we hear it all the time. I'm sure you hear it too. Man, you're going to have to spend all that money to replace your battery. 0.01% of these batteries are going to have to be replaced. I don't know the statistics on engines being replaced. I'd be curious if that's low. That's something I can research as well. But 0.01%. And also, according to the electric article, which I'll post, put a link to in the show notes, most of the issues would have been covered by the manufacturer's warranty. Like we stated, most of these battery failures happen under the manufacturer warranty. Improvements in batteries have come from, learning and more mature battery technologies. We have active liquid cooling, battery cooling. We have new strategies of thermal battery management, as well as new battery chemistries. LFP batteries are coming out now, things like that to help reduce cost. So yes, so I would say overall, it's not likely going to happen, but if it does happen, it is pricey. You're probably looking at, $10, $12, $15,000 if you do have to replace your battery in your car. Anything else you want to add, Sebastian?
Yeah, so just kind of note in there, you mentioned that percentages of the batteries needing to be replaced has gone down significantly. It's also important to note the number of EVs being sold year by year has gone up. So
Yes.
We're talking 0.1% of a much bigger number compared to maybe this, compared to 2011. And it's important to note, if I'm not mistaken, the only real EV on the market in 2011 was the Nissan Leaf, which is an EV that doesn't have any sort of active battery cooling or, anything like that. It just basically has a battery on wheels and it doesn't really do anything to help itself. And so it's not surprising to find out that if that is truly the only real model in that study for that year, that it would have 7.5% battery failure rate. And I just also wanted to bring up, that yes, the battery is expensive. I've seen, numbers, I think, from Tesla in the $10,000 to $12,000 range. But really, as far as I'm aware, that's pretty comparable to what it would be to have an engine replaced, especially in a modern day vehicle. This isn't the early 2000s where you can go to a junkyard, find another Buick LeSabre with the same engine, rip it out and drop it in yours for, $2,000 or $3,000 maybe.
Yep.
Yeah, it's 2024. These engines are so complicated. They make it to where the dealerships can only work on them to program these modules, everything. Your dealership's going to charge you $10,000 to $12,000 to replace an engine, if not more than that. And unfortunately, there's a couple bad apples in there. There's posts that go around of dealerships charging, quoting exorbitant amounts for these battery replacements. And ultimately what it boils down to is the dealership doesn't want to work on it. Yep. The dealership is anti-EV. They don't want to deal with it. So of course they're going to throw this giant number out because it's a win-win for them. They either don't have to work on the car or they just screwed you and made a whole bunch of money off the ordeal.
That is true.
Because I believe I saw somewhere someone mentioned that Hyundai wants $50,000 to replace the battery in an Ioniq 5. That's not how much the part is. That might be how much that one specific dealership quoted you for, but you could probably find another dealership that will charge you, quote, a much better number. And ultimately, too, these people making battery quotes for like that a lot of them are just cold calling dealerships and asking. They don't necessarily have an actual issue with their car, right? And of course, the dealer then has an incentive to tell you a super large number because it gets you in the door to buy a new car. Not saying all dealers are terrible. There are good dealers out there. But unfortunately, there's a lot of bad apples that kind of ruin the name.
Yes, there is. Yeah, there is. And that's how word gets spread. I mean, you see that one car fire or something online of an EV, and that's what people think, oh my gosh, look, the battery fire, it's huge. Now I will say this, an EV battery fire is hard to put out. I mean, the power and the force behind an EV gas, not EV gas, but just an EV vehicle fire is a lot. I mean, it takes a lot, to put out one of those batteries, but it doesn't happen that much. It's not like you have to worry about, I don't go to bed at night worrying, is my car going to catch fire in my driveway? And everyone asks me that. Do you park it in the garage? I'm like, yeah. Well, aren't you afraid it's going to catch fire? I'm like, no. Just like I'm not thinking my microwave's going to catch fire or my stove's going to catch fire, or my refrigerator's going to catch fire, or my washer and dryer. I just don't think about that. So,
yeah, I mean, it's just as terrifying if you think about it to park a gas car full of a highly flammable liquid in your garage.
Yes, that is true.
I drive a Chevy Bolt, and everyone knows about the Chevy Bolt battery recall because they were catching on fire. But if the ultimate statistic, I believe, was, 20 cars caught on fire. Now, that's still 20 cars, but it's like 20 out of 60,000. It wasn't, it gets into that whole 0.1% deal, so ultimately every car will have some issues, and whether or not it's, an actual big deal just kind of depends on how many were sold, what's the likelihood of it happening to you type situation.
Totally agree. All right. So Sebastian had his 3. I had my 3. We want to hear what you have to say. So if you may agree or disagree with us, you may give us, more, kinder to the fire here over some of the things that we've talked about. But please let us see your comments. Let us see your stories. If you've had any stories regarding any of these topics, feel free to follow us. You can follow Sebastian on X at Kilowatt Station. You can follow me, the EV Geek Podcast, on X at the EV Geek. That is all for today. We want to thank you for joining us. And until our next episode, we hope you'll have a great day. See you, everyone.
See y'all.